Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Nickolas Butler, author of the new novel, Godspeed. Nickolas, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your new novel, Godspeed, how would you describe the novel?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of a ticking clock literary thriller about three guys who own sort of a young construction company, and they are approached by a mysterious wealthy woman who wants them to finish the construction of her architecturally significant house outside of Jackson, Wyoming. And if they can do so in a rather short amount of time, they'll get a robust reward. But of course, because it's a thriller, things don't go easily. And the reader knows things aren't going to go well, but they don't know when things are going to go bad and how they're going to go bad and who they're going to go bad for.
Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to writing Godspeed?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, back in 2014, we finished construction of the house I'm talking to you from, south of Eau Claire, Wisconsin. It's nothing like the house described in the book. And a family friend who works in the construction trades came over to talk and look at the house, and he started telling us about this house he'd been working on, multi-million-dollar house not far from us, and the crew kind of slipped behind on their projected finish date for that house, and the homeowner got everybody on the crew together and said she would offer them each a 5-figure bonus if they could finish the house in the next 3 weeks. And he said, Nick, if we had all the meth in the world, we couldn't have finished that house in 3 weeks. And I thought, that seems like a good idea for a book. So I started asking myself questions about, well, who is that homeowner and where does their money come from? And why do they have this deadline? And what would happen if that crew of guys said that they would do it? And what if things started to go wrong as they approached their deadline? What would they do, that deep into a project to stick with it so that they could get the reward? And what if they did begin using math to stay up all night long? So, yeah.
Well, what was your original writing journey that led you to writing and getting your debut novel published?
Well, it's a long story. I don't know. I mean, I think I've been probably writing since the 5th grade. I wrote for my middle school newspaper. I wrote for my high school newspaper. I've always loved books. I mean, I think that's where most people's writing career really begins. Like, are you passionate about books and stories? I worked a string of really crappy jobs through my 20s, never made any money, but kept writing, publishing things here and there, poetry, little bits of nonfiction. And then when my wife became pregnant with our first kid, I think I was like 28 and working at a liquor store, and we were on food stamps and close to bankruptcy. And I just sort of had a conversation with myself about like what kind of dad I wanted to be, what kind of man I wanted to be, and what I was good at. And the only thing I could really think that I was any good at was writing. So I started taking private workshops. I started taking fiction writing really seriously and applied to grad schools 1 year, got totally shut out, applied again the next year, and got into Iowa. And from there, things, moved very quickly for me.
And what was your MFA experience at the Iowa's Writer Workshop?
Well, I think everybody has their own Iowa stories. It's a psychologically, difficult program for everybody. But my story was basically that my family and I were living north of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and because my wife had a good job there in the Twin Cities, and we couldn't afford for her to not have that job. So I would commute down to Iowa City every Monday from the Twin Cities, which is a 4.5-hour drive. I lived in crappy apartments, and then I'd come back on Wednesday or Thursday, and that sort of discomfort or hardship really focused me, because I kept asking myself, you know, well, basically telling myself, if you don't have a book by the time you're done with these 2 years, what are you doing? And what was my wife doing? As basically a um, unwitting single parent all of a sudden, and what was I doing away from my baby boy? And I tallied up all the hours I spent in the car during those 2 years, and it amounted to 31 days of my life just in the car driving. But that really meant that I was fully invested in what I was doing. I was not screwing around. I was laser focused. I wrote all the time. I mean, I wish there's days I feel guilty, 5 books into my career, that I don't still have that exact same fire and resolve and focus, because I was unstoppable.
And what were you writing? Were you writing things that were kind of outside of your class assignments, or was it all focused? I mean, I'm not sure exactly how I was structured. You said you were working all the time. What were you writing at the time?
Well, basically the way the workshops operate is, normally you'd be able to submit somewhere between 2 to 3 short stories or novel excerpts per semester. The first semester I was there, I was in James Allen McPherson's workshop, which was life-changing for me for a multitude of reasons. And I think I submitted 5 short stories that semester, which earned me a commemorative Michael Jackson plate that McPherson gave me. I was working on, I didn't know that it was a short story collection at that time, but I was working on stories that would become Beneath the Bonfire. And I was working on novella length stories that would become big chapters of my first novel, Shotgun Love Songs.
Well, when you were working on your novel Godspeed, what was the writing process? When you're working on a novel, is it the same? Do you outline extensively, or do you just kind of jump into the narrative and see where it takes you?
I think it changes book to book. With Shotgun Love Songs, I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first novel. And I think, like maybe a lot of writers out there, I thought, well, I'm just going to write short stories. Like there's something really pure about short stories, probably because they're completely unmarketable. But then I got sort of Jedi mind tricked into writing a novel. I'd shown my agent some of those novella length bits of what would become Shotgun Love Songs, and he felt like it was really a novel. So with that book, for example, I just printed out every unlinked chapter that I had, laid them out on my dining room table, and then kind of assembled in order for things, figured out where the holes in the narrative were, and then went back and rewrote that and tried to give each character equal footing in the book. But that might be the only book that I really have ever mapped out. With Godspeed, it was just this frenetic, frantic, self-imposed deadline that I gave myself. I basically worked anytime I could for 5 months on that book while I was promoting another book that had come out, Little Faith, which is the 4th book I've published. And I didn't have any roadmap for what was happening. I knew these guys had a deadline. I had a deadline. I had a rough idea of where I wanted to take the characters, and I really just kind of rode the emotional truth of the book, which was that these guys were under extreme pressure, and also that Gretchen, another major character, is also under her own pressure. And I applied that pressure to myself as the writer, and I think it worked, but I don't know that I'd really recommend doing that process to other writers necessarily.
Well, I know that you, as you've mentioned, you write short stories as well. I'm curious, when you sit down to kind of a blank page, do you usually know if it's going to be a short story or the beginning of a novel?
That's a good question. If I'm being really candid with you, Jeff, I haven't written a lot of short stories lately. And I love that form, and I'd like to get back to it. And I have short stories inside my head that need to come out. I think I've moved towards novel writing because I love the challenge of it. I love the form. I just love the space, that's in a novel. I love the world building and character building that can happen. I love the fact that I can explore my own life and curiosities and intellectual concerns, and you can do that in a short story for sure. But boy, you don't have the same amount of real estate to do it. But I think the quick answer to your question is, yeah, it's not like these days anyway, I don't start to write a short story and am suddenly surprised that it's a novel. I know,
Right.
I think the short stories that are in my head that need to escape, they're going to remain short stories. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories or novels?
I mean, the easiest advice is just read, 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 read. I think I don't teach a whole lot. I live in northern Wisconsin, and there's just, there's not a whole lot happening here. There's not opportunities for me to teach. But I do teach occasionally, and I always am fascinated and a little bit disappointed when I meet somebody who wants to be a writer who doesn't read. And it happens more than I'd like. And I always think that would be like me saying to like a professional carpenter, like a journeyman or a master carpenter, yeah, I want to be a carpenter. Only thing is I don't have any tools, and I'm not really interested in getting any tools. That carpenter would look at you like you were bananas. And I think it's the same way with writing. Like, if you're not reading all the time, what do you expect to happen? How do you think you're going to become a writer? And what do you think being a writer is? It's not fortune and glory. It's a lot of self-doubt and, years of silence, and then you release a book, and if you're really lucky, you might get, a week or 2 weeks or a month of attention. You're probably not going to get a ton of money. So you got to be obsessed with and love books and stories. And so I think reading's the biggest thing. And I mean, I think the other thing is that some writers will go to a workshop or a retreat, and they ostensibly are asking for advice, but really they what they want is affirmation. And that's another complete mistake. I mean, writing is a lot of rejection. People aren't being mean to you. They're trying to help you get to the best ending, the best case scenario. So you have to submit yourself. You have to be a little bit submissive during that process. And I think a lot of people don't want to be that vulnerable.
Well, you mentioned reading. What have you been reading lately that you've enjoyed?
Hold on one second. I've got a journal here where I keep all the books that I've read recently, because I have a terrible memory. I just finished my friend Ben Percy's book, The Ninth Metal, which for like sort of a thriller mystery sci-fi book was fantastic. Maybe the best of his career. I've read, what else did I read here? Heavier Than Heaven, a biography of Kurt Cobain. Love that book. What else? Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. Took that book really personally. My dad's been in a nursing home for 20 years, so notions of mortality and quality of life mean a lot to me. I read Still Life with Woodpecker by Tom Robbins on spring break. Love that book. How much time do you have? Bluebird Bluebird by Attica Locke. Great Mystery. In the Shadow of Wolves by Alvidas Slepikos. Dark book, but fantastic. It's been a great reading year. The Storm Chasers by Jenna Bloom. I could go on and on.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, are you working on a new novel now?
I am, yeah. I gotta write a book every 2 years, man, or I don't get paid. So yeah, I'm working on a new one. I gotta be a little bit coy with what I'm working on because I'm a little superstitious about that stuff. But I've got actually 2 ideas for novels, so I'm kind of at a crossroads where I gotta figure out which story is really got my attention and my energy, and then focus.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your novel Godspeed?
Yeah, my website is nickolasbutler.com. I'm on the gram at Wisco Butler. I'm barely on Twitter at Wisco Butler. Mostly I seem to have tweeted about Magnum PI. I don't know why that was important to me. I'm on Facebook, under Nickolas Butler. Yeah. And a big part of my career has been independent booksellers. So I try to get out there on the road and visit libraries and indie booksellers as much as possible. I think that's, even though these social media platforms are becoming more and more important and I'm putting more effort into them, a writer like me, those indie bookstores are just so important. So
that's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Nickolas Butler, author of the new novel Godspeed. The novel is on sale now, so you can go grab a copy. And Nickolas, thanks for doing this interview.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, stay tuned for a brief excerpt from the audiobook of Godspeed by Nickolas Butler, performed by John Orsini, available from PRH Audio, wherever audiobooks are sold.
This was the house that would change their fortunes. They could feel it. Cole had barely steered his pickup off the highway and passed through an open cattle gate before they began climbing the dusty canyon road north, and they could feel it. Money. Like a vibration in the crisp mountain air. It was humming out there, an expectancy, a promise. And they were driving toward it, cotton-mouthed, skin crawling. They could practically see it on the wind pushing the late summer leaves, swaying the yellowing meadow grasses, smiling down upon the dappled river water below. The whole world here looked like money. Money just waiting to be plucked up off the ground. The leaves like greenbacks, the shimmer of the water like silver coins. They needed this house, this break. They needed this work. Work for what sounded like as much as a year, maybe more. And not the thankless, back-breaking tedium they'd been reduced to for the past few years either. No, this was something to build a reputation on, a name, something to stake a man for decades. The kind of signature house a person could point to and proudly say, I built that. Me. I built that. The kind of house that, 30 years from now, when they were all broken down old men, they could travel to with their grandchildren and be welcomed, like masters of some dying art. Bart rode in the passenger seat, blinking down at the chasm that had now fallen away just an arm's length from the gravel road. Not even a mile off the highway, and already the country was wild, wild, wild. Below the road snaked a river raging white and blue, cataracts tumbling, and above them, off the low mountainsides, wispy waterfalls spilled down like great lengths of silver-white hair. A prominent dip of chew bumped out Bart's lower lip, and by he spit into an empty Coca-Cola can. I lived here almost 20 years, and I ain't never been down this road, he said, peering over at Cole, who took the gravel track with white-knuckled respect. A blown-out tire wouldn't just be a pain in the ass out here. It would put them behind schedule for their noon meeting with the homeowner, You ever been back here, Cole? Cole shook his head no, fixing Bart with a meaningful look for as long as he dared before turning back to the road ahead of them. This is big, pristine, private country, the look communicated. You and me, we don't just get invited back here. She told me she had a driveway punched in last summer, Cole said. Another 2 miles or so off this road. He pointed an index finger up into the mountains. Somewhere up in there, I'm guessing. You imagine the kind of bread they're spending? Teddy put in from the back seat of the extended cab. I mean, a 2-mile driveway? Up here? That's an Army Corps type operation. All that goddamn California money's what it is, said Bart. Hell, that state's filling up. Cheaper for them to come out here and plop a house down on a mountaintop than it is to buy a nice 2-bedroom in San Diego or Los Angeles. Cheaper to build a house in the clouds. Lunacy, you ask me. It had been an unseasonably warm spring and summer in western Wyoming, and now the mountain air was sweet with sage, the late August sky overhead deliriously blue and gauzed in cottony clouds. In the back seat, Teddy studied a gazetteer, biting his lower lip and running his fingers over the map. Bart hung an arm out the passenger side window as the truck began to pull away from the canyon side. Soon they passed through a glade of trees, and he reached out for the branch of a lodge pine, managing to snap off a handful of needles. Now the cab of the truck was filled with that smell, commingling with his Copenhagen chew, pine and mint and tobacco. All 3 men were dressed just a bit more presentably than usual. Unstained, newish Carhartt pants, plaid short-sleeve shirts with collars, scuffed work boots buffed up near to a shine. Cole glanced at himself in the rear view, tamping down his brown crew cut with his fingers and studying his newly shaved face, the razor burn beneath his jaw, his recently whitened teeth. Bart went to work with his pocket knife, cleaning beneath his fingernails, while Teddy sighed deeply and drummed his hands against his thighs.